Hey guys, Sean Lentz here from Appalachian DIY, and if you put your truck in four-wheel drive and hear this noise, it may not be your transfer case, it may be something else. That grinding, crunching, or clicking noise that you're hearing is probably not your transfer case. Most likely it's your CV joint on your front axle, and that's what we're going to be replacing today. The first thing that we're going to need to do is remove our drive shaft. There are 15mm bolts on the front, and there are 8mm bolts on the CV joint in the rear. If you guys are having problems getting this CV joint out from this collar, just take a punch, and there's these holes back here. It's not the ones with the threads where your bolts go in, but there's an additional one back here. Just take a punch and you can punch this thing out pretty easy. As you can see here, this thing is really tight. It's all dried out inside. I lost my boot a while ago, and all that salt and water and stuff that gets in here dries these things out, and there's no grease in here. So I think that's what really ruins these. So for preventive maintenance, get some grease in here, and it's going to make this thing last a lot longer. The first thing that we're going to need to do is take this top cap off. The best way to get these caps off is just to tap them out with a hammer and screwdriver. You don't really need to worry about messing it up because you get a new one with the kit. You can see in here how completely dry this is, no grease whatsoever. The first thing that needs to come out is this snap ring, and the best thing to do is hammer it around in a circle to kind of break it up. Once you have that snap ring loosened up, you can just go ahead and take your snap ring pliers and take it off. There is a little crimp clamp on here on the boot. Just go ahead and take that off. Alright, the next thing to do is actually pull this thing off. I tried beating mine off at first, and it did not want to come off. So I went out and got a gear puller, and we're going to pull it off with that. I finally got off the CV joint. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I actually wasn't able to get it off with the gear puller and a 3/4 inch impact. I had to go to a buddy's house and use his 20-ton press. So just be forewarned that it may take a little bit more to get these things off than I had originally thought. This was dried out for about a year and a half, and maybe just the salt from Pennsylvania and all the road grinding crap seized this thing up so bad that we had to use a 20-ton press. So you may be able to get away with a gear puller, but I was not able to. Once you get it off, make sure you clean it up with a wire brush to get all this rust and scaling off. It's going to be a lot easier to get the new bearing on, and it also gives a good seal on here for the new boot. The first thing we need to do is give this a light coating of grease. Take your clamp, go ahead and put that on first, and then install your boot. And then you can go ahead and tighten down your clamp. And then just fold these pins down. Okay, before we go any further, there's actually two sides to this CV joint. The front, or the end that faces away from the shaft, is this one right here. It has this recess in the top, and that's where our seal is going to go. And you can see that the back, the bearings are totally open, and the front, they're pretty much closed because it cups over. So it's going to go on this way with the open end back, and the place where the seal goes facing forward like this. Before we put this bearing on, we're going to need to pack it with grease. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is get some grease in your hand. This is a multi-purpose high temp grease. Okay, once you have your glob of grease in there, what you're going to want to do is work from the back side where the big holes are at in your CV joint. And all you're going to want to do is take your CV joint and press it down into your palm and a scooping motion. What that's going to do is it's going to pack the grease into there and it's going to shove it up into the top. So just work your way around, shoving it into the bearings. You can see it coming out of the pass-through holes where the bolts are going to go. That's exactly what it's doing on the inside. So as you can see on the back side here, it's getting pushed up into the back side, and this is going to take a lot of grease. You can see it coming through. You can see it starting to come through on the top side. One thing to note is that when you're pressing this grease in, don't press from both sides because you'll never know if you get any air gaps in here. So if you only press grease from the one side, you'll know when it comes up to the surface that it's fully packed with grease and there's no air pockets in. If you pack from both sides, you're going to trap some air in there and you'll never know if you get it fully coated. If you hear any snapping or popping when you're pressing into it, that means that you got air trapped inside. So make sure that you press your grease in until you hear that stop. Okay, so you can see the top side here. We're almost completely packed around here. We just have a little bit to go on the bottom. This is by far the messiest part of this entire job, but the most important as far as protection for this bearing. That's probably why mine went out in the first place. There was not a drop of grease on it anywhere. It was really dry, and that's probably what made it wear out. So make sure you guys spend the time to pack it properly and get that grease in there really good. Once you have the bearing greased, go ahead and you can pump some grease back into here. It's going to help with overflow and being able to put as much grease into this bearing as possible. Okay, now make sure that you put it on the right way. We have the recessed area right here that is going to face out, and that will just slide right into place. Now make sure that your boot and your holes in your bearing line up before you go any further. Make sure that it's fully seated back and you have access to where your snap ring goes up front, and make sure it's fully seated back into the boot. Now that we have the bearing together, go ahead and start cleaning everything up that we have all slicked up and greased up. That way we can start putting our seal on and not get full of grease. Make sure that when you're cleaning this up, you're using clean rags because you don't want to push any dirt into your bearing. We can now put our snap ring back in place. Put the new seal in. And now we can put our dome cap back on. You can fill this up with grease in here if you want. So when you put it on, grease won't fly out from your bearing. There is a hole in here, so from the outside you can fill this with grease with a needle gun. So there we have our cap packed, and we can just place that on now. Make sure that both plates are evenly set on both sides. Alright guys, that wraps up this tutorial for rebuilding the CV joint. It was a pretty easy task except for when it came to getting the bearing off of this shaft. That was definitely really tricky. My bearing puller didn't do it. Hopefully your guys will work. If not, you're going to need a press to get it out. This is a really cheap repair because all you got to do is buy the repair kit instead of the entire shaft, which can get pretty pricey. You can pay anywhere between $30 and $60 for the repair kit, and I'll post the link for Amazon of where I got mine in the description below. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. Head over to Appalachian DIY and subscribe for more videos. Thanks again guys, and I hope to see you next time.